Well, I'm standing here at St Paul's Anglican Church in Cobbitty, and just over beyond is a campsite called Teen Ranch. And I was here about a year ago, and some young people, I was working with some young people down there, and one of them said, you know, that church up there on the hill, that's got a story attached to it, a bloke called Thomas Hassell. I said, really? So we went up and found this beautiful stone church and cemetery, but tucked away behind there is his grave, Thomas Hassell's grave. And his story was that he came to Australia with his parents. They'd been to Tahiti, found it too difficult, but they travelled halfway around the world with their little family, found it pretty tough there in Tahiti, retreated back to the colony of New South Wales and settled here. And Thomas, this young boy, was born here, and by the time he was 19, he started the very first Sunday school in Australia. So I brought all these young leaders up here, 20-year-olds. We stood over there and we told them this story and said, you know, this guy is your hero. You know, this young Australian-born colonial developed a vision for Australia. So he was educated in England, went back to England, married the daughter of Samuel Marsden, came back to Australia, both of them Australian-born, and they settled in this district eventually. First of all, they went up to Port Macquarie, and eventually he had to leave Port Macquarie because he was being very critical of the way that the convicts were being treated there, which says something about him, and eventually came to this place here, to this district. You know, I discovered that his parish, or his diocese, whatever it was called, but extended from, well, he said, everywhere beyond, you know, Australia beyond Liverpool is basically what he said. And that meant Bathurst, Goulburn, Illawarra, and back up here. Massive district, still pretty wild. So it was no wonder he became known as the Galloping Parson, because he spent a lot of time on horseback trying to cover all that territory with pastoral care, visiting the lonely, the isolated, ministering to people. And he had a great reputation as just a really personable, friendly bloke. Everybody called him Tom, not Reverend so much, but Tom. And he spoke to everybody about Jesus. Didn't matter whether it was a soldier or a settler or Indigenous people, children. He had a great reputation. People in this district came to love him for his big heart, his passion for sharing the good news of Jesus with people everywhere here. And so he was laying a foundation, not just for this district, but for the future of Australia. And it came from his heart, came from his faith. He and his wife buried over there, and that little church they built there wasn't just a church, but it became a school as well for 80 years. Just amazing what they gave. Okay, we're standing here in the Heber Chapel, built in 1827. This is Jill, and Jill's one of those quiet gems that you find around the countryside who've got a love for stories.
When Thomas Hassell came here, was appointed here as a minister in 1827, he came with the materials in this building to build himself a house. But he was able to purchase Denby at the time, and he instead built the chapel here on a land grant given to his father.
That says something, doesn't it? Like
yes.
he saw it was important to build this place, and then he turned it into a school as well.
The school was half was church on Sunday, school through the week.
Fantastic, and it was a school for 80 years?
80 years, something like that.
Okay, so I try to picture, you know, dozens, hundreds of kids who came into this place,
school, yeah,
built out of his resources to help educate the new colonial kids.
New colonial kids, that's right, yes.
Wow. And so here it is quietly sitting here, and it's got a whole story living in it.
That's right, exactly, and not many people know about it.
You said to me before how important you felt it was that young people knew these stories. Why?
Well, it's an incredible part of Australia's history from the start. It's this whole complex of buildings here go back to the very early days of the colony. But the important thing is it shows that a man like Thomas Hassell, with a great faith in God, would come here and be prepared to establish what was then the Church of England, now the Anglican Church in this.
It was more than just that, wasn't it? It was a whole. It was business. It was
everything.
School.
Yes, everything.
Care,
yes,
pastoral care.
That's right. The whole thing. He did the whole thing, and ended up being a very much respected, wonderful man in the district.
So he'd be a great hero for young people.
He would, definitely.
Absolutely.
Definitely. His story should be known.
I'm out at Denby on the edge of Camden, Campbelltown area, and today we're going to look around this beautiful homestead, and it's part of trying to help you understand how you can see the footprints and fingerprints of Jesus all over this country. A lot of it's hidden. You can't always see it, but you can learn how to find it. Not only learn how to find it, but put it to use. Yeah, what a fantastic house this is. But there's more than just a house here, because there's a story embedded in it, hidden in it, that I just love. Because this man, Thomas Hassell, started to create this place in the early part of the 1800s as a home for his family, but more than that, he was creating an industry. He was a very successful sheep breeder, wool grower, and this was all part of creating early Australia. So these guys weren't just preachers in the pulpit. He was that, but he was also an industrial, creating an industry here. And when you start to think about it and what these guys did, he also, on the other hill, we've heard the story this morning about, he created a school there and a church. And this place, I think, probably became a refuge for a lot of people. I'm sure up there in his office, the library is still there. I picture people coming in to talk to Tom, as they called him, because he was so well liked in the area. And the area was a very big area that he covered. But people came here to talk to him, and he was probably the early form of counselling when there was an influenza epidemic in the area. He was in the centre of the caring part of it, and grieving families, the health part, the medical part. And so when people, I get tired of people telling me, you know, the Christians only ever interfered with our history. That's not true. Men like Thomas Hassell, Tom, you know, he had people coming through that door over there, and he was building into the lives of the early settlers in this area that generated something powerful and strong, and was the beginning of our country, the beginning of white Australian settlement here, but it also embraced the Indigenous people. Standing here wondering whether Thomas Hassell used to come up here and look across all this and think back to when he was a kid, you know, growing up in Australia in the very early days before 1800. And then at the end of his life, as he looked out across the fields here and the sheep, and as he thought about all the people that he'd met and he'd ministered to, and then he knew that his son was on the trail too. He was a preacher, settled down on the Southern Highlands, and his sister was over in Tonga as a missionary, and he knew what his mum and dad had given coming to Tahiti, then to Australia, and to the early days of the colony. How full his heart must have been of thanks to God for bringing them all the way halfway around the world, and to create something like this, a place of blessing and encouragement and teaching, enterprise, vision. Why wouldn't you be proud of Thomas Hassell? Jesus met a woman sitting on a well. She was Samaritan, he was Jew. There were cultural barriers, there were gender barriers. And she starts a historical discussion, you know, do you know this is my ancestors' well? So she's talking about sacred site. And Jesus leads her into this discussion about wells and water. And in the end, what he does, he sort of connects her story to the big story. He said, well, yeah, there's the story of Israel and there's the story of Samaria, but there's a bigger story you need to know, that you need to connect your little story and your broken life to the big story. And I think that's what we can do. Here in our own country, in Australia, we can find stories and help connect them to God's big story and make sense of it.